The accidental intrusion. Captain Jake Hawkins strode purposefully through the gleaming corridors of Starbase Omega, his keen eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. As head of security for the massive space station, it was his job to ensure the safety of the thousands of beings from across the galaxy who called this place home or were just passing through. Today was particularly tense. A major diplomatic summit was about to begin, with representatives from over a dozen alien species gathering to negotiate a new interstellar trade agreement. If successful, it could usher in an era of unprecedented prosperity and cooperation. If it failed, well, Jake preferred not to think about that possibility. As he rounded a corner, a flash of movement caught his eye. A hooded figure was slipping furtively down a restricted access corridor. Jake's hand instinctively went to the phaser at his hip as he picked up his pace to follow. This could be the saboteur his team had been warned about, someone intent on derailing the summit before it even began. The mysterious figure always seemed to stay just out of reach, ducking around corners and through hatches moments before Jake could catch up. His pulse quickened as the chase led them deeper into the bowels of the station, away from the public areas. He had to stop them before they reached any vital systems. Finally, the figure darted through a doorway and Jake lunged after them, bursting into the room with his weapon drawn. "Freeze," he shouted. "Hands where I can see." The words died in his throat as he registered his surroundings. Steam billowed around him, and the air was thick with the scent of floral soaps. Wide-eyed alien faces stared back at him in shock. With dawning horror, Jake realized he had just barged into the women's locker room of the station's spa complex. I'm so sorry," he stammered, lowering his phaser and averting his eyes from the various states of undress around him. I was chasing. I'll just go." He turned to flee, face burning with embarrassment, when a lilting voice stopped him. "Well, hello there, handsome. No need to rush off on our account." Jake looked up to see a statuesque Arcturian woman sauntering towards him, apparently unbothered by her lack of clothing. Her skin shimmered with an opalescent sheen, and her silver hair seemed to float ethereally around her head. "I'm Lyra," she purred, "and you must be the dashing Captain Hawkins we've heard so much about. I must say, the rumors don't do you justice." What?" Jake managed, his brain struggling to process this turn of events. This was not how he expected his pursuit to end. A throaty chuckle drew his attention to a curvaceous Orion woman with emerald skin. "Oh, leave the poor man alone, Lyra. Can't you see you're flustering him?" She sashayed over, her hips swaying hypnotically. "I'm Thala. Don't mind my friend here. She just loves to tease." Jake forced himself to maintain eye contact, painfully aware of the dozen or so other alien females watching this exchange with varying degrees of amusement. "Ladies, I apologize for the intrusion. There was a security situation and I—" "A security situation?" interrupted a new voice. A petite Vulcan woman with delicately pointed ears stepped forward, one eyebrow raised quizzically. "Perhaps you care to elaborate, Captain. I'm T'Pren, Chief Science Officer for the Vulcan delegation. If there is a threat to the summit, we should be informed." Jake hesitated. He didn't want to cause a panic, but these women deserved to know if they might be in danger. "We received intelligence that someone may attempt to sabotage the conference," he explained. "I thought I saw a suspicious individual and pursued them here. Clearly I was mistaken." A ripple of concerned murmurs spread through the room. Lyra's playful demeanor vanished, replaced by steely determination. "Then we shall help you search," she declared. "No one threatens the peace we've worked so hard for." "Agreed," said Thala, her green skin darkening with resolve. "Just give us a moment to get dressed and we'll join the hunt." Jake blinked in surprise. "I appreciate the offer, but this is a job for trained security personnel. I couldn't ask you to put yourselves at risk." T'Pren fixed him with a level stare. "With all due respect, Captain, you are not asking. We are volunteering, and I assure you, many of us are quite capable of handling ourselves in dangerous situations." As if to emphasize her point, she reached into a nearby locker and withdrew the sleek Vulcan phaser pistol. Jake's eyes widened. Apparently the science officer came prepared for more than just academic debates. Looking around the room, he saw similar expressions of determination on the faces of the other women. These weren't helpless civilians. They were diplomats, scientists, and leaders in their own right, and they were offering to stand with him against whatever threat loomed over the station. A slow smile spread across Jake's face. Maybe his blunder hadn't been such a disaster after all. With allies like these, the mysterious saboteur didn't stand a chance. "All right then, ladies," he said, squaring his shoulders. "Let's hunt ourselves a terrorist." As the women bustled about gathering clothes and makeshift weapons, Jake couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns life could take. He'd started the day worried about keeping the peace between bickering alien factions. Now he was about to lead an impromptu strike team of determined females from across the galaxy. Whatever happened next, he had a feeling it was going to be one hell of a story to tell over drinks when this was all over. Assuming, of course, they all lived to tell it. With a wry chuckle, Jake checked his phaser and prepared to brief his unexpected new allies. The real adventure, it seemed, was only just beginning. Unexpected alliances. As Jake led his eclectic group of alien women through the winding corridors of Starbase Omega, he couldn't help but marvel at the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Lyra, the Arcturian diplomat, moved with fluid grace, her opalescent skin shimmering under the station's lights. Thala, the Orion trade representative, kept pace beside him, her emerald eyes constantly scanning for threats. T'Pren, the Vulcan science officer, brought up the rear, her logical mind no doubt analyzing every possible scenario. "So, Captain," Thala whispered as they rounded another corner, "what exactly are we looking for? You mentioned a saboteur." Jake nodded grimly. "We received intel that someone plans to disrupt the summit. Could be anything from planting explosives to releasing a virus in the ventilation system. Our job is to find them before they can act." "Fascinating," T'Pren murmured. "Have you considered the possibility that the threat may come from within one of the delegations?" The thought had crossed Jake's mind, but he'd been reluctant to voice it. "It's possible," he admitted, "which is why we need to be careful about who we trust." Lyra laughed softly. "And yet here you are, trusting a group of alien women you quite literally stumbled upon in a locker room. The universe does have a sense of humor, doesn't it?" Before Jake could respond, a distant explosion rocked the station. Alarms began blaring as the lights flickered ominously. "It seems our quarry has made the first move," T'Pren observed calmly, though her grit on her phaser tightened. Jake tapped his communicator. "Hawkins to security, report." Static crackled for a moment before a panicked voice came through. "Captain, we've got multiple breaches in the lower decks. Some kind of shape-shifting creatures are pouring in." Jake's blood ran cold. Shapeshifters. That explained how the saboteur had evaded him earlier. And if there were more of them? "Listen up, ladies," he said, turning to his impromptu team. "Looks like we're dealing with more than just one threat. I need to get to the security center and coordinate our defenses. Can you make your way to the conference hall and warn the delegates?" Lyra stepped forward, her silver hair seeming to crackle with energy. "We can do better than that, Captain. We'll evacuate the delegates to the safe zones. I know the emergency protocols." Thala nodded in agreement. "And I can use my persuasive abilities to keep everyone calm." She winked, reminding Jake of the infamous Orion pheromones. "I shall assist in securing the station's critical systems," T'Pren added. "My scientific expertise may prove useful in countering any technological sabotage." Jake felt a surge of admiration for these women. They'd known each other for less than an hour, yet here they were, ready to risk their lives to save the station and the peace summit. "All right," he said, making a quick decision. "T'Pren, you're with me. Lyra, Thala, get to the conference hall and do what you can. We'll rendezvous at Safe Zone Alpha once the immediate threat is contained." As they prepared to split up, Lyra caught Jake's arm. "Be careful, Captain," she said, her luminous eyes filled with concern. I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface of this conspiracy. Jake squeezed her hand reassuringly. You too. All of you. And thank you. I couldn't ask for better allies. With a final nod to each other, the group separated. Jake and T'Pren raced towards the security center, while Lyra and Thala headed for the conference hall. As they ran, Jake's mind raced with possibilities. Who were these shapeshifters? What was their ultimate goal? And how had they managed to infiltrate the station so thoroughly? They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. The corridor ahead was filled with writhing, amorphous blobs, the shapeshifters in their natural form. As Jake and T'Pren watched in horror, the creatures began to take on humanoid shapes, mimicking various alien species. Fascinating, T'Pren murmured, even as she raised her phaser. Their cellular structure must be incredibly adaptable. Jake didn't share her scientific curiosity at the moment. Less admiring, more shooting, he shouted, opening fire on the nearest shapeshifter. The battle that ensued was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. The shapeshifters were relentless, absorbing phaser blasts and reforming themselves with disturbing speed. For every one they managed to incapacitate, two more seemed to take its place. T'Pren proved to be a formidable ally, her precise shots and calm demeanor, a stark contrast to Jake's more aggressive style. Together, they slowly carved a path through the shapeshifter horde. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, a familiar voice rang out behind them. Duck. Jake and T'Pren hit the deck as a wave of searing energy swept over them, engulfing the shapeshifters. When Jake looked up, he saw Lyra standing there, wielding some kind of Arcturian energy weapon he'd never seen before. Thought you could use a hand, she said with a grin, helping them to their feet. Thala's got the delegates secured. We need to get to the control room and lock down the station. As they raced towards their destination, Jake couldn't help but marvel at how quickly their ragtag group had come together. Humans and aliens working side by side to face a common threat. It was everything the summit had hoped to achieve, played out in microcosm amidst chaos and danger. They burst into the control room, quickly overpowering the shapeshifters who had taken control. T'Pren's fingers flew over the console as she initiated lockdown procedures and began purging the station's systems of any alien influence. Captain, she called out, her voice tight with tension. I've isolated the source of the infiltration. It appears the shapeshifters entered through a hidden quantum portal in the lower decks. Jake's mind reeled at the implications. A quantum portal. That level of technology was far beyond anything the known species possessed. Who could be behind this? As if in answer to his unspoken question, the main view screen flickered to life. A figure appeared, shrouded in shadow, its features impossible to discern. Well done, Captain Hawkins, the figure said, its voice a discordant blend of tones that sent chills down Jake's spine. You and your unexpected allies have proven more resourceful than we anticipated, but this is only the beginning. The age of separate species is coming to an end. Unity through assimilation is the only way forward. The screen went dark, leaving Jake and his companions to exchange worried glances. The threat had been neutralized for now, but it was clear that a much larger storm was brewing on the horizon. As the adrenaline of battle began to fade, Jake found himself filled with a mix of emotions: fear for what was to come, determination to face it head-on, and above all, gratitude for the unlikely team that had formed around him. Looking at Lyra, T'Pren, and knowing Thala was out there keeping the delegates safe, Jake allowed himself a small smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that together, they stood a fighting chance. The accidental intrusion into the women's locker room had set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the galaxy, and Jake Hawkins, once a simple security officer, now found himself at the center of it all. As alarms continued to blare and repair crews rushed to contain the damage, Jake took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. The real battle, he knew, was just beginning. The looming threat. The days following the shapeshifter attack were a whirlwind of activity aboard Starbase Omega. Captain Jake Hawkins found himself at the center of it all, coordinating security sweeps, debriefing delegates, and trying to unravel the mystery of their enigmatic new enemy. His unlikely team of allies had proven invaluable. Lyra's diplomatic skills helped soothe frayed nerves among the station's diverse population. Verla's network of contacts provided crucial intelligence on potential infiltrators, and T'Pren's scientific acumen was instrumental in developing new detection methods for the shapeshifters. As Jake pored over security reports in his office, a chime at the door announced a visitor. "Enter," he called out, looking up to see Lyra glide into the room, a data pad in her hand and a concerned expression on her face. "Captain," she said, her melodic voice tinged with worry, "I've been analyzing the communication patterns of the various delegations, and I found something disturbing." Jake leaned forward, instantly alert. "What is it?" Lyra handed him the data pad. "There's been a significant increase in encrypted transmissions from several key delegations. The Andorians, the Tellarites, even my own people, the Arcturians. It's as if they're preparing for something, but keeping it hidden from the rest of us." Jake frowned as he scrolled through the data. Could it be a response to the attack? Heightened security measures? Lyra shook her head, her silver hair shimmering with the movement. "That's what I thought at first, but the pattern doesn't fit. It's more like coordination, as if they're working together on something big." Before Jake could respond, his communicator chirped. "Captain Hawkins, please report to Science Lab 3 immediately." T'Pren's voice came through, sounding as close to excited as a Vulcan could get. "I believe I've made a breakthrough." "On my way," Jake replied, standing up. He glanced at Lyra. "Care to join me?" "I have a feeling these things might be connected." Together, they made their way to the science lab, where they found T'Pren bent over a complex array of equipment. Verla was there as well, her green skin contrasting sharply with the sterile white of the lab. "Ah, Captain, Ambassador," T'Pren greeted them. "I believe I've identified the energy signature of the quantum portal used by the shapeshifters, and I've detected similar signatures at multiple points throughout the station." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying there are more portals?" T'Pren nodded. "Precisely. But that's not all. The technology required to create these portals is far beyond the capabilities of any known species in the quadrant, including the shadow figure we saw," Lyra finished, her eyes widening in realization. "Correct," T'Pren confirmed. "We are dealing with a highly advanced species, one that has likely been observing us for some time." Thala, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "That tracks with some chatter I've been picking up. There are rumors of a great revelation coming soon, something that will change everything." Jake's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The shapeshifters, the hidden portals, the encrypted communications between delegations. It all pointed to a conspiracy of massive proportions. "We need to alert Starfleet," he said, reaching for his communicator. But before he could activate it, the device sparked and went dead. Around them, the lights flickered and died, plunging the lab into darkness. Emergency backup power kicked in moments later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Jake tapped his communicator again, but there was only static. "We're cut off," he realized aloud. "Whatever's happening, it's starting now." As if in response to his words, a deep, resonant hum began to fill the air. The floor beneath their feet vibrated, and a strange, shimmering light began to seep through the walls. "The portals," T'Pren said, her voice tight with tension. "They're all activating simultaneously." Lyra moved closer to Jake, her luminous eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "What do we do, Captain?" Jake looked at each of his companions in turn. The brilliant Vulcan scientist, the cunning Orion spy, the compassionate Arcturian diplomat. In the short time they'd known each other, they'd formed a bond stronger than any he'd experienced in years of Starfleet service. "We fight," he said simply. "Whatever's coming through those portals, whatever grand plan is unfolding, we stand against it, together." Thala grinned, a fierce light in her eyes. I was hoping you'd say that. I've got some tricks up my sleeve that our shadowy friends won't see coming. T'Pren moved to a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls. I believe I can reconfigure the station's deflector array to disrupt the portal energy signatures. It won't stop them, but it might buy us some time. Lyra placed a hand on Jake's arm, her touch sending a warmth through him despite the dire situation. And I'll rally the delegates. Whatever differences we may have, we're all in this together now. Jake nodded, feeling a surge of pride and determination. They were facing an unknown enemy with vastly superior technology, cut off from outside help. The odds were stacked against them in every way. But as he looked at his team, this unlikely group of allies brought together by chance and forged in crisis, he knew they stood a fighting chance. Because they had something their enemy, for all its advanced technology, seemed to lack: the strength that came from true unity, from embracing their differences rather than erasing them. "All right," Jake said, his voice ringing with authority. "Let's show these shape-shifting shadows what happens when you mess with Starbase Omega. T'Pren, get to work on that deflector array. Thala, I want you to gather every scrap of intel you can, official channels, backdoor contacts, anything that might give us an edge. Lyra, you're with me. We need to get to the command center and coordinate our defense." As they moved to carry out their tasks, the humming grew louder. Through the lab's windows, they could see streams of swirling energy coalescing at various points throughout the station. The portals were fully forming now, gateways to who knew what nightmarish realm. Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle to come. Whatever emerged from those portals, he and his team would face it head-on. The fate of not just Starbase Omega, but perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. As he and Lyra raced towards the command center, Jake allowed himself a grim smile. He'd started this journey by accidentally bursting into a women's locker room. Now he was leading the charge against an alien invasion. Life, it seemed, had a way of taking the most unexpected turns. But with allies like these by his side, Jake Hawkins was ready for whatever the universe might throw at them next. Battle for the station. The command center of Starbase Omega was a scene of controlled chaos as Jake and Lyra burst through the doors. Officers rushed back and forth between stations, shouting updates and orders over the ominous hum that now permeated the entire station. "Status report," Jake barked, striding to the central command console. A young Andorian lieutenant looked up, his antennae quivering with tension. "Multiple breaches reported on all decks, sir. The shapeshifters are pouring through the portals faster than we can contain them. We've lost contact with several sections of the station." Jake nodded grimly. "What about external communications? Any word from Starfleet?" The lieutenant shook his head. "Still nothing, sir. Whatever's generating those portals is also creating some kind of subspace interference. We're on our own." Lyra stepped forward, her diplomat's calm a stark contrast to the frenetic energy around them. "Perhaps not entirely on our own, Captain. I've managed to make contact with several of the delegation leaders. They're rallying their people, preparing to defend their quarters." Jake allowed himself a small smile. "Good work, Ambassador. We'll need every able body if we're going to push these invaders back." Just then, T'Pren's voice crackled over the comm system. "Captain, I've succeeded in modifying the deflector array. It won't close the portals, but it should slow the rate of incursion by approximately 37.4%. "Excellent work, T'Pren," Jake replied. "Every little bit helps. What's your status?" There was a pause, filled with the sound of phaser fire. "We are holding our position in Science Lab 3, but the situation is becoming untenable. These shapeshifters are remarkably adaptable." Jake's jaw tightened. He couldn't leave T'Pren and her team to face the brunt of the invasion alone. "Hang tight. We're sending reinforcements your way." He turned to Lyra. "I need you to coordinate the civilian defense efforts. Get everyone who can hold a phaser to key choke points. We need to contain this invasion before it overwhelms us completely." Lyra nodded, her luminous eyes filled with determination. Understood, Captain. And what about you? Jake checked the charge on his phaser. I'm going to help T'Pren. If we lose those science labs, we lose our best chance of figuring out how to close those portals for good. As he headed for the door, Lyra caught his arm. Jake, she said softly, using his first name for the first time. Be careful. We need you. I need you. For a moment, the chaos around them faded away. Jake looked into Lyra's eyes, seeing the depth of emotion there. He wanted to say something, to acknowledge the connection that had grown between them in such a short time. But there was no time for words. Instead, he leaned in and kissed her, pouring all his unspoken feelings into the gesture. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Jake managed a roguish grin. I'll be back before you know it. Try not to win the war without me. With that, he was gone, racing through the corridors towards the science labs. The station shuddered around him, the sounds of battle echoing from all directions. Crew members and civilians alike were engaged in firefights with the shapeshifters, who seemed to be everywhere at once. Jake blasted his way through several shapeshifters, their amorphous bodies twisting grotesquely as they tried to absorb the phaser energy. He couldn't help but marvel at their resilience, even as he fought them off. Finally, he reached the science labs. The scene inside was one of barely contained chaos. T'Pren and her team had erected makeshift barricades, but the shapeshifters were slowly pushing them back. Cavalry's here, Jake shouted, diving into the fray with phaser blazing. His arrival seemed to reinvigorate the defenders, and they began to push back with renewed vigor. As they fought, Jake made his way to T'Pren's side. Please tell me you've got some good news, he panted between shots. The Vulcan scientist's normally immaculate hair was disheveled, and there was a green smear of blood on her cheek, but her eyes were alight with scientific fervor. Indeed, Captain, I believe I've identified the frequency that could disrupt the portals entirely, but we'll need to get to the main deflector control to implement it. Jake grimaced. The deflector control was several decks away, through corridors undoubtedly swarming with shapeshifters. Well, no one said saving the station would be easy. Let's move. He tapped his communicator. Thala, do you read me? After a moment of static, the Orion's voice came through. Loud and clear, Captain. What do you need? We're making a push for the deflector control. Could use some of those tricks you mentioned earlier. Thala's laugh was rich with anticipation. Oh, I thought you'd never ask. Meet you there, handsome. As they fought their way through the station, Jake was struck by the incredible diversity of the defenders. Humans fought alongside Klingons, Andorians covered Tellarites, species that had been bitter enemies now stood united against a common foe. It was everything the summit had hoped to achieve, forged in the crucible of battle. Finally, they reached the deflector control room. Thala was already there, surrounded by the unconscious bodies of several shapeshifters. Took you long enough, she quipped, tossing Jake a wink. T'Pren immediately set to work, her fingers flying over the controls as she implemented her plan. Jake and Thala stood guard, beating back wave after wave of shapeshifters. Any time now, T'Pren, Jake called out as the situation grew increasingly desperate. Just one moment, the Vulcan muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, with a final keystroke, she looked up. It's done. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to change. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, every portal on the station began to collapse. The shapeshifters let out an otherworldly shriek, their bodies contorting as they were pulled back through the failing gateways. In a matter of minutes, it was over. The hum that had filled the station faded away, leaving an almost eerie silence in its wake. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. We did it, he said, his voice filled with equal parts relief and disbelief. Thala clapped him on the back. Never doubted you for a second, Captain. T'Pren raised an eyebrow. While the immediate threat has been neutralized, I believe our work is far from over. The question remains, who was behind this attack, and what were their true motives? Jake nodded soberly. You're right. This feels like just the opening move in a much larger game. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together. As if on cue, his communicator chirped. Laura's voice came through, tinged with excitement. Jake, you need to get to the main conference room immediately. The delegates, they're asking for you. All of you. Exchanging curious glances, Jake and his team made their way to the conference room. As they entered, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. The room was packed with representatives from every species on the station, and as Jake and his companions entered, they all rose to their feet in a standing ovation. An elderly Vulcan stepped forward, raising his hand in the traditional salute. Captain Hawkins, on behalf of all gathered here, I extend our deepest gratitude. Your actions and those of your diverse team have not only saved this station, but have shown us the true power of unity in the face of adversity. Hours later, as the formal proceedings wound down, Jake found himself on one of the station's observation decks, gazing out at the stars. So much had changed in such a short time. He was no longer just a security officer. He was now the driving force behind a new interstellar alliance. Credit for your thoughts, Captain. Lyra's melodic voice broke into his reverie as she joined him at the viewport. Jake smiled, taking her hand in his. Just thinking about how different things might have been if I hadn't chased that shapeshifter into your locker room that day. Lyra laughed, the sound like chiming bells. The universe works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? Who would have thought that such an embarrassing moment would lead to all this? Speaking of which, Jake said, turning to face her fully. We haven't really had a chance to talk about us, with everything that's been happening. Lyra placed a finger on his lips, silencing him gently. Jake Hawkins, if you're about to suggest that what's between us was just a product of the crisis, or that it can't work because of our different species, I may have to throw you out this airlock myself. Jake chuckled, pulling her closer. Wouldn't dream of it. I was actually going to say that facing down an alien invasion made me realize life's too short for hesitation. Lyra, I love you. Whatever challenges we face, whatever strange new worlds we encounter, I want to face them with you by my side. Lyra's eyes shimmered with emotion. Oh, Jake, I love you too. More than I ever thought possible. As they kissed, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was celebrating their union. A discreet cough interrupted their moment. They turned to see T'Pren and Thala standing nearby, both wearing expressions of amused tolerance. Sorry to interrupt, Thala said, not sounding sorry at all, but we've got a situation that requires our attention. T'Pren nodded, her usual stoic demeanor tinged with excitement. Indeed, we've detected an anomalous energy signature in a nearby sector. It bears similarities to the portal technology used by the shapeshifters. Jake straightened, immediately alert. Could it be them? Making another move already? Unknown, T'Pren replied. But given recent events, I believe it warrants immediate investigation. Jake looked at each of his companions in turn, the logical Vulcan scientist, the cunning Orion spy, and the compassionate Arcturian diplomat who had stolen his heart. This unlikely team, brought together by chance and forged in crisis, was now poised to take on whatever the galaxy might throw at them. Well then, Jake said, a grin spreading across his face, what are we waiting for? Sounds like we've got a mystery to solve and a galaxy to protect. As they headed off together, ready to face whatever lay ahead, Jake couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns life could take. An accidental intrusion into a women's locker room had led to the formation of a team that would shape the future of the galaxy. And this, Jake knew, was only the beginning of their adventure. The end, or perhaps just the beginning. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at his team. T'Pren, her logical exterior softened by a hint of pride. Thala, grinning widely as she soaked in the adulation, and Lyra, her eyes shining with something that looked a lot like love. Thank you, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. But the real victory here belongs to all of us. We've proven that our differences are our strength, not our weakness. Whatever challenges the future holds, I believe that together we can face them." As the applause washed over them, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. The shadow threat still loomed, and there were many questions left unanswered. But looking around at this gathering of united species, at the unlikely team he forged, Jake Hawkins felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The accidental intrusion into a women's locker room had set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the galaxy, and Jake couldn't wait to see where this adventure would take them next. A new era begins. In the weeks following the shapeshifter invasion, Starbase Omega buzzed with a new energy. The shared experience of facing a common enemy had forged bonds between species that diplomacy alone could never have achieved. Jake Hawkins found himself at the center of it all, hailed as a hero and sought after for his insights on interspecies cooperation. On this particular morning, Jake stood before the newly formed Galactic Unity Council, a diverse gathering of representatives from every species on the station. The chamber hummed with anticipation as he prepared to deliver his report. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored delegates of all species," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "The threat we face together has been neutralized, but our work is far from over. The shadow enemy remains at large, and we must be prepared for their next move." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Jake continued, "However, in facing this crisis, we've discovered something profound. Our differences, which have so often divided us, proved to be our greatest strength. It was the unique skills and perspectives of individuals from across the galaxy that allowed us to triumph." He gestured to his team, seated in a place of honor near the front. T'Pren sat with perfect Vulcan posture, while Fowler lounged casually in her chair. Laura caught Jake's eye and gave him an encouraging smile that made his heart skip a beat. "I stand before you not just as a Starfleet officer, but as someone who has seen firsthand the power of true unity. And so, I propose that we formalize the cooperation that saved us all. Let us create a new organization, one that draws on the strengths of all our peoples to face whatever challenges the universe may throw at us." The chamber erupted in applause and cheers. As Jake stepped back from the podium, he was immediately surrounded by delegates eager to discuss his proposal. But before he could get pulled into conversations, a firm hand gripped his arm. He turned to see Commander Veen, his former superior officer, looking at him with a mix of pride and amusement. "Not bad, Hawkins," she said with a wry smile. "When I assigned you to security detail for the summit, I never imagined you'd end up proposing a new galactic order. Starfleet Command is impressed, to say the least." Jake felt a flush of pride at her words. "Thank you, Commander. I had a lot of help, though." He glanced at his team, who were now mingling with the delegates. Veen followed his gaze, her expression softening. "Yes, you're unconventional allies. I must admit, I had my doubts when I first heard about your locker room escapade. But you've proven that sometimes the best teams are forged in the most unexpected ways." Before Jake could respond, Laura appeared at his side, her luminous skin seeming to glow with excitement. "Jake, the Arcturian High Council wants to speak with you. They're talking about committing significant resources to your proposed organization." Jake nodded, then turned back to Veen. "Duty calls, Commander, if you'll excuse me." As he moved through the crowd with Lyra, Jake felt a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. The challenges ahead were daunting, but he was no longer facing them alone.